Yeah, and that's one of the most important cards. I think Wingmate Rock is at the top of the list, both players packing 2 copies, and then Elspeth is very good when both people will slow the decks down and become more removal focused.
And both players resolving mulligans here. So a lot of these games do seem like they would grind out, in a manner of speaking.
Yeah, they do slow down. A lot of the creatures do trade, and if the players are boarding anything, it's expensive late game cards and removal. So it does slow down a bit.
All right, well, we are underway. Game 3, Nick Verrall versus Ben Warschauer. Both players are on 6-card hands. Nick starts out with a Temple, scries to the bottom, so you go back over to Ben. See, Ben's hand looks like a lot of tap lands and a pair of Siege Rhinos. Certainly not a terrible strategy in any situation.
The Siege Rhinos can be a little bit anemic in the post-board games if you're not backing them up with early pressure, because they are a little bit on the slow side. They get devoured by removal spells, usually for less mana than the Siege Rhino cost, but Siege Rhino is still Siege Rhino. Can only be so bad.
Temple for Ben as well. Both players setting up. There is a Rakshasa Death Dealer as a possible turn 2 for Ben. Nick, second land tapped. He'll pass. Looks like both players are just going to trade tap lands to start the game. See, pass back. First turn of the play of the game will be on Nick's side on turn 3. See just what it is. It's a Rakshasa Death Dealer, but no third land to accompany it, and that's going to be a big one. Ben does have the land to go with it. It's Temple of Silence. Looks like he has a Death Dealer of his own as he leaves a card on top.
And to me, so much of this matchup feels about who's the first person to fall behind, either because you miss a play or because you miss a land drop, and now Nick's in a lot of trouble.
These are not Death Dealers, but Fleece Main Lions. Players both with each of them. And on Nick's side, this is one of the great powers of Jamoka's Command. Both players played a Fleece Main Line, so Nick decided to Jamoka's Command to win the fight and crash in for 4. But for Nick, still stuck on 2 lands as we go back to Warschauer.
Yeah, and the problem here is there's so much pressure on Nick to make his land drops now, because as Ben is making his land drops here, he's able to do things like play a removal spell and a threat in the same turn, perhaps play Siege Rhino, and that's going to be hard for Nick to overcome if he's not making his land drops.
Yep, Ben uses Hero's Downfall to clear off the board again. We go over to Nick, still stuck on 2 lands. He'll play a Rakshasa Death Dealer, but that's it. Ben Warschauer pulling ahead here thanks to having more lands. And here's land 5 for him. It's Llanowar Wastes, and now the Rhinos start to take over the game. Here's Siege Rhino, and Ben takes the life advantage 19-17.
Good news is I believe Nick has Valorous Stance in hand, so he at least can remove the first one.
And for Nick, he finally does his land drop. Now, the winner of this will be going on to play another Abzan Aggro Mirror match in our other top 8 matchup. Daniel Longoria, 2-1, defeats Tyler Stewart playing Esper Dragons. So the only Esper Dragons deck in the top 8 does not make it into the semis, and it's going to be Abzan Aggro waiting in the semifinals in the hands of Daniel Longoria.
I mean, given the representation of Esper Dragons in the room, not a great weekend. I believe 16 copies into day 2, only 1 in the top 8. Same number of Abzan Aggro decks, and we have 3 in the top 8.
For Nick, he was able to play a land, stance away the Rhino, and then swing with Death Dealer. Ben will just adopting the control out here. He self-inflicted wounds away the Death Dealer, plays a copy of Anafens of the Foremost, and passes back.
Self-inflicted wound is just so powerful in matchups where the life total matters, and the Abzan Aggro mirror match definitely qualifies.
Yeah, I mean, in this matchup, the fact that it's just sacrifice a creature might as well just be kill a creature. They rarely have more than one.
Only in spots where someone has already run the game away with the game with something like Elspeth.
Yeah, but they're all good. You know, you don't care which one you're getting. It's okay, Death Dealer or Lion, that's fine. Nick plays Siege Rhino. He's going to even up the life totals again. And despite being behind for so long, you start to think, hey, maybe Nick has some life in here. He's up 18-13 and now has a 4-5 on the board.
Well, I mean, a lot of these resources have just traded. As players block, players use removal spells, and so if Nick is stalling on lands, but Ben can't capitalize, eventually Nick starts drawing some mana and becomes the favorite.
I mean, it is how the Abzan mirror matches go. There's just a lot of trading involved. You see Ben, with 2 remaining cards in his hand, has the ability to cast both. It's a Siege Rhino and a Rakshasa Death Dealer. Depends how much he wants to protect the Death Dealer. This is an interesting decision for him. He can play them both in 1 turn and leave the Death Dealer shields down, or he can play Death Dealer to keep the mana up for it, but he definitely pays a price for doing that.
Yeah.
So he's gonna go with Siege Rhino and not play Death Dealer, so that when he finally plays it, he can protect it. I do like the line from him. Life totals even out again.
A big part of this is Ben's just running out of things to do. And if he plays his last card there as a Death Dealer and it just trades for Bile Blight or some anemic removal spell, he's living off the top of his deck at that point. So I think Ben needs to squeeze a little bit more out of this Death Dealer.
Land 5 for Nick Verrall. You look at his hand, it looks like he has 2 copies of Anafenza and an Abzan Charm. And he'll pass to Warschauer. Draw for Ben. Copy of Fleece Main Lion, another threat here. We'll see how he wants to proceed. There's a lot of open mana to be attacking into. You wouldn't want to attack you wouldn't want to get blown out too hard by Obs on Charm here.
Or even Hero's Downfall. It's a
Sure.
very risky attack to make here if Ben has no removal spell of his own.
Plays Rakshasa Death Dealer, leaves up 4 mana. All of it can be pumped into Death Dealer. Has double green, double black. Costs him some life points to do it, but right now that doesn't seem to be what the game is about. And Ben holding up, plays the Death Dealer. Doesn't even want to play Fleece Main line here, just passes the turn with no attacks. I mean, can't really attack.
Well, if Ben plays defense effectively here by making sure his Death Dealer doesn't die and is an effective blocker, then he gets some draw steps to try to find some action.
And well patience on Nick's side. So after the turn is passed, Nick has an Obs on Charm in hand, does nothing on end step. And his draw, not too much help. He draws the 3rd copy of Anafenza. Now has 3 Anafenzas and an Obs on Charm, but he's not behind just yet.
The problem is, if Nick's not going to cast Anafenza, if Ben finds a removal spell for Siege Rhino, suddenly he takes a huge hit. Nick's hand is in this awkward spot of he has 5 lands in play and a variety of 3-mana plays, and he doesn't want to put the shields down on Obs on Charm, so he's sitting here and waiting, but he's at risk of the Siege Rhino getting killed and taking a bunch of damage.
So here's Rakshasa Death Dealer for Ben. He did draw a land 7, which is a lot of lands, but his last card is Fleece Main Lion, so 7 a pretty nice number for him. And he's going to be able to leverage the mana advantage. I think with better cards in hand, Nick's board is stable enough that I think he could pull ahead, but the fact that his hand is tripling up on Anafenza, yes, he's up, he has these cards, but it's really hard for him to convert them into real resources.
Any of his 2-mana plays would allow him to play that, plus leave up Obs on Charm. Any of his big plays are big plays, and they're powerful.
Yeah.
He's kind of in the worst of both worlds here with a bunch of Anafenzas and an Obs on Charm, which is too powerful for him to cycle for additional cards, but doesn't allow him to do anything proactive right now. He's just sitting here and waiting for Ben to allow him to use the Obs on Charm, essentially.
Fleece Main Lion, the draw for Ben, the play for Ben, and he leaves up 5 mana. Nick draws land 6. That's going to be helpful for him. Now remember, eventually, the fact he said that he can't use the Obs on Charm to draw cards, which is probably true, but Nick is the one player who has Elspeths. That does allow him to try to be the control deck here.
Exactly. He can kind of just sit back for a little while. Now, Ben's has enough of a board here where even though Nick has an advantage as we go late, if Ben draws something like a removal spell for Siege Rhino, if he draws Wingmate Rock and can just make a pretty big attack,
Sure.
even though Nick's got the edge, he might just die way too fast before he finds an Elspeth.
That said, if he does hit the Elspeth, one Elspeth stabilizes the board more or less for Nick.
Yeah.
It's an interesting situation. He's going to fetch for land 6. Definitely waiting for that one to allow him to cast Anafenza. And that's what he'll do. It's interesting, Anafenza in this mirror match just feels pretty small on this board.
It's not the most impactful card here.
It trades with opposing Anafenzas is probably its best role.
Yeah, I think it's among it's weaker than the 2 drops and doesn't match up well against the 4 drops.
Go back over to Ben Warschauer. 1 card in hand, that's the one he just drew. Did not try to Monstrosity Fleece Main Lion. I don't think Nick's ever going to take down that Obs on Charm, though. The one thing that Ben can do is overload Obs on Charm. Nick kind of wants to Obs on Charm both the Lion and the Death Dealer. Can't actually do that.
Well, I think that Ben is still in the spot of, I need to just extract a lot out of my cards. So I don't think he's going to go monstrous with the Fleece Main Line because he doesn't want to risk losing that or the Death Dealer in response for the time being. He needs to squeeze a lot out of his cards right now.
Yeah, I suppose even getting a Monstrosity counter on the Death Dealer, if it costs him the Fleece Main Line, or the Monstrosity on line, if it costs him the Death Dealer to do it, then he still doesn't have a source of damage. Swing in here. Anafenza will put a counter onto Siege Rhino. Ben has decided it's time to attack.
And the writing's on the wall that Nick has some sort of removal spell because he's been missing land drops, played land number 6, and then cast an Anafenza that was clearly in his hand. So
feels a lot like a Downfall or a Obs on Charm.
Yeah, the evidence is very strong here that Nick's just been sitting on a removal spell the entire time.
All right, it's going to be Anafenza in front of Death Dealer and Siege Rhino in front of Anafenza for Nick. He's looking to take 5 off of Ben's Rhino. 1 card in hand for Ben and a Death Dealer in play. We'll see what Ben wants to do with this mana.
And Nick here willing to essentially chump block with the Anafenza here to tie up some of Ben's mana, and then also allow him just to cast one of his replacement Anafenzas next turn.
Yeah, keeping that Anafenza alive is a very low priority for Nick. He has so many of them. They are legendary. Now we'll get to see Ben's play. He's going to pump once. That makes the Death Dealer 4/4. Now they're going to trade. He'll pump. Looks like he'll go for another one. That's going to be either making it a 6/6 or regenning it. Both do more or less the same thing. Does Nick want to exile now? He can get the... Now, this is the thing. Will he go for the Death Dealer or the Fleece Main Lion with this Obzon Charm? He can get either.
I think he's most likely to get the Siege Rhino here.
And leave... Okay, leave both of the 2 drops.
I think so. I think Siege Rhino is 5 damage this turn, and Nick doesn't have any path to really block it in the long term.
And that may be. Interesting choice here. A lot of cards he really needs to remove. And you're right, it's going to be Siege Rhino.
I understand it is attractive to maybe remove
Sure.
Fleece Main Lion, especially the Death Dealer, but I think with Nick's hand the way that it is, he's got to just kind of protect his life total here and hope to draw Elspeth soon.
Yeah, so big trade happening there. Siege Rhino's exiled. Anafenzas go away. What's left over is the pair of 2 drops for Ben, the Death Dealer and the Lion, and a Siege Rhino for Nick. And Nick keeping his life total at 14.
So now Ben's got to decide, why did Nick chump block with the Anafenza? If the answer is he's going to play another Anafenza, then maybe Ben doesn't play his own copy because he's going to be unable to cobble together much of attack next turn and doesn't want to risk putting the shields down on the Death Dealer.
Draw for Nick, and this is what he needed. It's Elspeth Sun's Champion, one of his 2 copies out of the sideboard.
And Nick rewarded there immediately for exiling
The Rhino.
The Rhino.
Yeah.
He knew that he's more or less playing to Elspeth this game. Needs to protect his life total, get a trampler off the table, and now the game has immediately swung around into Nick's favor.
Yeah, here comes Siege Rhino. Ben Warschauer down to 12. And what a draw. Nick just treading water all the way up until he found one of his Elspeths. And this card is just so good in the matchup. Over see Obzon Charm and Anafenza, the 2 remaining cards for Ben Warschauer. Now he has to be very aggressive, but he's not even ahead on the race.
And this is the type of board where Nick could go chump block, hang back with Siege Rhino, and eventually go ultimate with Elspeth. That's a winning path in this game.
Yep, chump twice. It's going to be Anafenza for Ben. Still has that Obzon Charm. Maybe could exile a Rhino. But you're right, it is so hard for them to get after those Elspeths.
Ben needs a Hero's Downfall pronto.
Obzon Charm, the draw for Nick.
That's about perfect there. I mean, Nick definitely in the market for a removal spell. It allows him to make use of 6 mana this turn by casting in an Anafenza and leaving up Obzon Charm. And we're getting closer and closer to Nick being able to just go ultimate with Elspeth and win the game that way.
Makes 3 more tokens. But you are right, if Ben finds a Hero's Downfall before that Elspeth makes an emblem, we have a game again. And because of that pressing need, it'll be interesting, whether or not Ben can afford to draw cards with this Obzon Charm. I mean, if he doesn't find Downfall, his outs are so few here.
Well, the problem is he's also behind, or at least at parity on the board regardless. I think that if he takes this Rhino hit, takes 2 points of damage to Obzon Charm for 2 cards, even if he finds Hero's Downfall, he's likely to be in a lot of trouble. I think he's got to hope that the top of his deck is just very beneficial.
Stuck between a rock and a hard place bit here. See how he wants to Obzon Charm. The really greedy play would be to try to pump and block. Looks like he takes the hit off and goes to 8 off Siege Rhino. And he's going to draw cards. Down to 6. Didn't have to pain there. Does have an Urborg in play.
Yeah, I'm still not thrilled with this play because I feel like if he finds, even if he finds Downfall, it's going to be hard to beat the board.
Well, Sorin could help. He drew one of those, along with a land and another 2-drop. Yeah, maybe it's possible that if a Wingmate Rock can save him in this situation if he drew it that very turn.
Wingmate Rock is some game.
Yeah, it's not out of the woods, but it's a start.
Yeah.
It takes care of Elspeth at the very least. And here's Sorin Solemn Visitor. Playing it takes down the Fleece Main Lion mana, though.
Yeah, the Fleece Main Lion mana is not really a priority now with Elspeth doing its thing.
Plus from Sorin. That'll give Ben's creatures lifelink. At least with the Sorin here, his life total is not as much of a concern. But that Elspeth, still a huge concern. And the tokens she's making very good, too.
If Ben doesn't make significant inroads into Nick's board, then even if Ben does gain some life here, Elspeth's ultimate plus whatever board Nick has will still be enough to kill. The other problem here is Ben can make an attack, but he's got to leave enough back to protect Soren.
And just a story of different sideboards. Ben definitely taking an aggressive plan. He has 3 copies of Self-Inflicted Wound in the sideboard, which are great in this matchup. For Nick, none of that card, but the 2 copies of Elspeth Sun's Champion really show a slower game plan, but one that once he gets going is a lot more difficult to answer.
Yeah, and typically you want to be the slower deck. Self-Inflicted Wound can definitely have spots of being powerful, but when both of these players spend the early turns kind of not really curving out and playing lands that come into play tapped, I'd much rather have the Elspeth than the Self-Inflicted Wound.
There's a lot of trading and tap lands in the early game. And on that, and if that's how the game's going to progress, all these trades, all these scries, Elspeth's just great, as you see here. Ianafenza's trade. Please main line is chumped by a soldier token. Healthy amount of life gain there for Ben, 9 of it. Rather 10 of it. And Death Dealer post-combat. He'll say go. Ben up to 16. Elspeth looming.
Yeah, 3 more chump blockers against 3 attackers. Plus a Siege Rhino that Nick can use to hang back on defense.
It's 4-4 line. Nick debating if he wants to Obzon Charm it. It's not hexproof yet. The counter is from the Anafenza that happened on the attack.
And I don't think anything on Ben's board right now is compelling enough to use an Obzon Charm. I think Nick's better served just holding it in hand.
Absolutely. Temple, Scries keeps on top. 6 mana up. Nick's done a great job of trading away these Anafenzas so that he can play more Anafenzas. Pluses the Elspeth up to 7. That's the key number. 3 more soldiers into play. Nick's hand is a Obzon Charm and an Anafenza. Can have a great board. Could be lethal as early as next turn. And here's Anafenza number 3. And he'll swing some of the creatures. Some soldiers swinging along with Siege Rhino.
I imagine this is an effort to get Soren off the table.
Well, if Ben blocks with some Death Dealers, Nick can actually take one of them down with the Obzon Charm. He can put counters on some soldiers if Ben tries to eat them. Ben can only regenerate 1.
Yep. And if he just blocks a token with each Death Dealer, well, then that's 5 points of damage coming across at Soren, and now that's off the table.
Yep. So that 5 damage will take care of Soren. Soren will be down. The question here is, does Nick want to trade an Obzon Charm for a Death Dealer right now? Which he could. And I think he will.
Yeah, just confirming that because of Soren's plus power, Death Dealer is an eligible target for the Obzon Charm.
Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and exile. That's a lot better than counters. That denies some of the life gain. Well played, Mr. Verrall. And there's Anafenza as the last card.
2 creatures against 4 blockers, and that emblem looming. And now it's got to be downfall. I think Ben's still in a lot of trouble even if he finds it, but it's got to be downfall.
Here's a draw. Didn't get a look at it, and it's a fetch land. So there you go. Nick Verrall in 3 defeats Ben Warschauer to move on to the semifinals.
Power of Elspeth in the mirror match. As you mentioned, Ben taking a slightly different approach with Self-Inflicted Wound, trying to be aggressive. Both players stumbled out of the gates in game 3. And once you get to past turn 3, turn 4, assuming players are making their land drops and trading, Elspeth just looms over the entire game. Nick was behind, drew Elspeth, then was suddenly ahead and never let up.
Well, and for